Something interesting happens when you're trying to build in public. You record an episode, you feel really good about it, you've got your framework and your examples and your takeaways, and it feels clean and it makes sense. And then you continue to do the work and you realize that the story you just told doesn't match reality anymore. And that's what happened with the first version of episode 3. We had it in the can several weeks ago. It was about the process we were using to rebuild Northpoint. Our lead to lease system was going to be the example that we used. It was nice and tidy. It was all wrapped up in a bow. And then as I was getting ready to put that out, and I was looking at what was actually happening with our team, I realized it was all kind of wrong. A lot of the things that I thought was working, upon closer inspection, really wasn't. So I scrapped it. And I think that's an important moment to just talk about and open up this episode with, because as a leader, it's my job to stop every now and again and ask, am I actually leading our team down the right path? Or am I just doing things? And unfortunately, I think we were just doing things. And this episode is about what changed and why. For those of you who've listened to episodes 1 and 2, you already know a bit of the context. Northpoint was running on 14, probably more, disconnected tools with very few formal SOPs, no programmatic training, and we're consolidating onto AppFolio and trying to rebuild the way we operate from first principles. And the framework that guides everything we're doing hasn't changed. It's a sequence. And although I'm saying that sequence has more overlap than I initially thought it was going to, but the sequence is the same. It's process, then training, then technology, then AI. And you really have to do them in that order. Otherwise, you end up building on quicksand. And I'll explain a bit why. Process has to be first because you define how the work is actually getting done before you try to improve it. Training is second to make sure that people know how to execute, obviously. Technology is third. And this is important because the tool should serve the process, not the other way around. And then AI and automation last, and that's because that's only after the foundation is solid and you understand where you are inserting that automation or AI element into that overall workflow or process architecture. Most operators will get this backwards. They start with the tool. They'll say, we need a new PMS, or we need AI, or we need a maintenance platform, and they wonder why the rollout fails, adoption is low, and 6 months later, the team is back to spreadsheets and group text. The tool didn't fail. They skipped the foundation. And I still believe that completely. That hasn't changed at all. What changed is how we do the first step, the process work, because it turns out that's actually the hardest part. And the way I was approaching it just wasn't working. So here's what I tried first. I thought I could design the processes from a desk. And not literally a desk, but the approach was essentially, I'll interview the team, we'll abstract out all the key components and elements, we'll map the workflows, we'll design the future state from first principles, and then hand it off to the team to execute. And that's what most consultants would tell you to do. That's what a lot of the operational excellence playbooks prescribe. And it's not entirely wrong. You do need someone with a design perspective. But here's the problem. I was building processes based on my understanding of how work should flow. And my understanding, no matter how experienced I am, is flawed. It's incomplete. Because I'm not the one doing the work every day. I'm not the one fielding the calls. I'm not the one navigating all of the edge cases. I'm not the one managing vendors. The people who do that work, they have answers I don't have. And, I should have known this because my mentor in property management told me a long time ago that the site team has all the answers. It's just up to you as a leader to go ask them the right questions. And it's funny seeing that kind of echo back and come back around and having to reflect on that. Oh, it's the same thing, just applied in a different place. So here's ultimately what I learned. Those people can rarely articulate those answers with enough specificity to actually rebuild a process around them. Ask a regional manager to explain how turns work, and you'll get a general overview. We get a move out. Then we get, are we going to move out notice? Then we schedule and the inspection. We scope the work. We assign vendors. We track completion. We do a final walk. Sure, that's accurate from a 30,000 foot view. But processes don't break at 30,000 feet. They break in the handoffs. They break in the details. It breaks in the decisions that live between those steps. It breaks into things that people do automatically that they've never written down or a lot of times even thought consciously about. And when I was designing processes without that level of detail, without deconstructing what people actually do, I was building on assumptions. They were clean looking assumptions. They were documented in nice format assumptions, but they were still assumptions. And that's what the original episode 3 was based on. And when we started implementing, those gaps showed up fast. So before I get into the work group model that we landed on, I want to tell you about something that we stumbled into just the past couple of weeks that changed how we're approaching a lot of this. And I have to give credit to our CEO, Dan French, for bringing this to the table and really insisting that we go through these deep dives. So we had been planning what we originally called Demo Day. We wanted teammates to come in and demo how they use their tools day to day. Show us AppFolio, show us in Google Workspace, show us in GoToConnect, show us whatever you're working in and just walk us through one aspect of your day while we watch. And really quickly, we realized this wasn't actually a demo, it was more discovery. So we renamed it Discovery Day, patent pending. And it was one of the most eye-opening things we've done so far in this journey. So what we recognized was that what people told us about their processes in interviews and meetings and casual conversations didn't necessarily match what they were actually doing when they sat down to do the work. In fact, it rarely matched what they were actually doing when they sat down to do the work. And that wasn't because they were lying. They weren't. They were telling us what they believed they were actually doing. But when you watch someone actually work, when you see them navigate between the screens, see where they hesitate, see the workarounds they've built, see the tabs they have open, see the steps they skip or add that aren't in any documentation, you get a completely different picture. We identified friction points we never would have found through interviews alone, places where the tool was finding them, steps that were redundant, handoffs that existed because of a workaround from 2 years ago that nobody had ever revisited. And a lot of these things we could clean up and fix quickly. That was just low-hanging fruit that had been completely invisible to us before we started this process because no one had actually watched the work happen. And this has been a breakthrough for us. It solved the problem I mentioned earlier is people can't always articulate what they do with enough specificity to build a process around it. But they can show you. And when they show you, the gaps between the story and the reality become really obvious. So now for us, Discovery Day is the lead-in to everything else. Before we deconstruct a process in a work group, we want to see the actual process first. We want to watch it happen, then deconstruct it, then put it back together. And that's the difference between asking a mechanic to explain how they diagnose an engine problem versus standing next to them while they do it. You learn 10 times more by watching. So with that context, here's what the full model and approach looks like now. We stopped trying to design processes top-down. Instead, we built cross-functional work groups informed by what we observed during Discovery Day. So first, what's a work group? It's a small purpose-built team, typically 3 to 5 people, assembled around a specific process or workflow that needs to be redesigned or improved or evaluated. So who are those 3 to 5 people? Who's actually in the room? Every work group starts with an owner. This is the person who has the authority to enforce compliance once we launch the redesign process. And that's really important. If the person leading the group can't actually hold people accountable for the changes that we're making and the things that you're building, you're ultimately building something that nobody's going to follow. The other 2 to 4 members are subject matter experts. They're people who actually touch the process from different angles. And that different angles is also really important. If you're working on, say, a make-ready process, just having members of the maintenance team involved in that process isn't going to be enough. You need to have the handoffs ultimately back to management when that home is ready to rent. You need to have the handoff from management 2 turns on the front end So you have to have people on the operations side also who inform and touch that process to really get the full picture so that you make sure you're building something that actually solves the problems for everybody and doesn't create downstream issues for the rest of the team. For our term process work group, that group included a regional manager, maintenance coordinator, as well as a property manager, and then someone from our leasing and marketing team. And that gave us basically the full picture of what it is that we were looking for. The key, again, is that it's cross-functional. So once you have the team, how long does it last? Well, these aren't one and done. We assemble them for a specific purpose, say to redesign the term process or redesign the work order flow. But the plan is to keep each group together for a year, and they will do quarterly check-ins and reviews of the processes they built and evaluate how things are working, see now that they're in the field, that they're out in the wild, what still needs to be tweaked and changed and evolved. Something I learned from my kind of sabbatical playing around with building software for a couple of years is this idea of ship and fix or iterate on something, because you can't build the perfect product. You can't build the perfect process. Not until you have people actually using it and doing the work will you be able to then refine it and make it to where it's really, really great. So we get the group together, but who facilitates? I mentioned a few minutes ago that you have to have that person who's a systems thinker or a design thinker to pull things out from people and to put the pieces together. And that's where our operations enablement team comes in. And I want to spend a couple minutes talking about that team because I think that's the part that a lot of operators are actually missing. The operations enablement team rolls up under me at Northpoint. And in fact, at this point, it's really the only thing that's left that rolls up under me at Northpoint. And that's by design, because this work is what matters the most right now for us as a company. So I want to try and first set up a little bit about what operations enablement is, because if I don't, you'll probably assume it's something that it's not. It's not training. We're not building courses. We're not running onboarding sessions. That's a different function. It's not a help desk. We're not the team you call when you can't figure out how to do something in AppFolio. We're not the internal consultants who parachute in, write a report, and then leave. What we actually do is we facilitate the creation of operational clarity. At least that's what we spend most of our time doing. Now, we're a small company, so there is some overlap with some of the other things that I just mentioned. But the intent, and especially if you're a slightly larger company, is that you facilitate the creation of operational clarity. What does that actually mean? It's a bunch of big words. Well, we sit between how things work today and how they need to work tomorrow. And we help provide the structure, the questioning, and the documentation discipline to get from one of those things to the other. And this distinction really matters because it defines what we own and what we don't. Again, we own clarity and structure. The operations team owns execution. So we don't tell operators how to do their jobs. We help them define, document, and improve how they do their jobs, and then we get out of the way. And if that sounds subtle, it is. But in practice, it changes everything about how that work group dynamic actually functions. We're not in the room to be experts. We're in the room as facilitators. The subject matter experts from across the team that we've pulled in for this work group are the actual experts. And it's our job to pull that expertise out of them in a way that's specific enough to actually be built upon. Those subject matter experts, the work group owner, they know how things actually work. They live it every day. But knowing how to do something, and as I said before, being able to deconstruct it with enough precision to rebuild it, those are very, very different skills. I used the example about building an engine earlier. Maybe another quick one is if I asked you to explain how to drive a car, you give me the basics. Hands on the wheel, foot on the gas, check your mirrors. But you leave out the hundreds of micro decisions that you make automatically. How you scan intersections, when you start braking relative to the car ahead, how you adjust for weather. You do all of those things. You just don't think about it consciously. Operational processes in a business are the exact same. Your maintenance coordinator has an entire decision tree in their head about how they prioritize work orders that they've never actually articulated to anyone. And I'll be really candid. I'm going through this right now, trying to help our business development team refine their processes, because I've done biz dev a lot in my career, and so much of that is just reflexive and intuitive to me because I've done it for so long. So trying to break that down for someone's hard for me, and I've gone through this process a lot. Operations Enablement's job is to pull out that expertise, to ask questions that force specificity, to press people, and respectfully of course, but firmly, to explain and justify the decisions that they've been making on autopilot. And we've seen this already with our term processes, with basically every discovery day that we've done, is there are always sacred cows. And we will always find, we've always done it this way, assumptions. There are ownership questions on who actually owns this specific step. And a lot of times we've run into situations where the answer is, well, it depends. Or when we really break it down, honestly, nobody. And those are the landmines that you want to avoid. Those are the landmines that really, really undermine great implementations, great change management, great rollouts of new processes or technology. If you don't surface these things in the deconstruction phase, they will always blow up on you during implementation. And I know this because that's exactly what happened to us the first time around. All right, so that's been a lot of setup. Let's just jump into now how a work group actually operates once we've gone through Discovery Day and we understand the real picture. And we've settled into a bit of a rhythm that feels like it's working. And I'm saying settled into because we've been doing this for a few weeks. And it is inevitable that this will evolve and change, but this is our current flow today. So Discovery Day gives us the raw material. We've watched the process happen. We've seen gaps between what people say and what they do. And now the work group takes over. So we have a 3-meeting structure. Meeting 1 is deconstruction. This is where Operations Enablement really earns its keep. We take the existing process apart, and not the idealized version, but the real one. How does this actually happen today? Not how is it supposed to happen? Not how you wish it happened, but how does it actually happen? And this is where the pressing comes in, because the first answer you get is almost always the sanitized version. Even when we've just watched it, not be that. But an example might be, we receive a work order, we triage it, we assign it. But okay, how do you triage it? What information are you looking at? What decisions are you making? What happens when 2 work orders come in at the same time, and one is urgent, and the other is for an owner who calls every day? How do you prioritize them? You have to ask and ask and ask until you get down to the atomic level of every decision point, every handoff, every piece of information that moves between people or systems. And then here's the part that makes it a little different from a typical consultant interview. The people answering these questions are the same people who will own the redesign process. So when you surface a gap or an inconsistency, something like, wait, you're saying accounting thinks maintenance owns that step, but maintenance thinks accounting owns it, and you have kind of the who's on first thing. It's not an outsider pointing fingers. It's the team discovering it together. And that buy-in so far, I think, has been and will continue to be really important. You can't mandate process change from the top down and expect compliance. I've seen it not work so many times in my career. You have to get the people who do the work to see the problems themselves, and this deconstruction makes those problems visible, and it allows you to build champions within your team for these new processes that you're going to roll out. So that's meeting 1. Meetings 2 and 3 are a guided reassembly. So once we've taken it apart, we rebuild. And now we're rebuilding with full awareness of what the current process looks like, where it breaks, who actually owns what the sacred cows are, and whether or not they deserve to stay sacred. Operations Enablement will guide this process. We're not necessarily telling the operators what the process should be. We're asking the questions that lead to a better design. Something like, if this handoff is where things break, what would make it cleaner? If nobody owns this step, who should? If you had to explain this to a new hire on day 1, what would you tell them? That's a big part of, especially meeting 2, of the initial rebuilding. And then the other big piece with that is, ideally through this process, and this is something we're still trying to get better at, but the documentation and training materials actually get created in the same sessions. So not after the fact. We initially started doing them after the fact, and we never got to them. But when you do them as part of that same session, and not as a follow-up project, the SOPs, the work instructions, the job aids, they're built as we go by people who understand the work. That's been really, really helpful because, as I mentioned, we were trying to do it after the fact, and documentation was always behind. We were trying to move quickly, Everything felt incomplete. It was always written by someone who wasn't actually necessarily doing the work. So with this new process, the documentation is a byproduct of the redesign itself. And the people who built the new process are the ones who are articulating it, with the Ops Enablement team providing the structure and consistency to make it usable and easy to access, and all the other things that make great support content actually useful. So we just got through a lot, and I want to take a moment to bring this back to the bigger picture. Process to training to technology to AI, and that sequence hasn't changed. What's changed is my understanding of how hard the process step really is and what it actually requires to do it well. It's not a design exercise that you do in a conference room on a whiteboard. It's a facilitated deconstruction with the people who live the work every day, followed by a guided reassembly that produces not just a better process, but the documentation and training to ultimately support it. And here's why that matters for everything that comes after it. If your process design is based on assumptions, even smart, experienced assumptions like mine were, your training will have gaps because the documentation has gaps. Your technology will be misconfigured because the workflows don't actually reflect reality. And your AI or automation will amplify those mistakes at scale. But if your process is designed on a genuine deconstruction of how people do the work, if you've surfaced all the sacred cows, clarified ownership, mapped the actual decision points, then everything you layer on top of it is built on solid ground. The training's accurate because it was built during the redesign by the people who do the work. The technology can be configured correctly because the process is documented at the atomic level. And when you eventually bring in AI and automation, you know exactly where it fits, and more importantly, you know where it doesn't. That's what I've learned, that first principles actually means in practice. Not, I'm smart enough to design this from scratch. It means get to bedrock. I'm really fascinated by the idea of Kimba Kaizen. Go to the actual problem, understand what's really happening, and then build up from there. I know most of you don't have a dedicated operations enablement team, and that's fine. The principle still applies. You can still take a lot of what we're doing and apply it in your companies. So here's some ideas on some things that you can actually do this week. Pick a process that's causing pain. Yes, whatever one just popped into your head, pick that one, right? Whatever's causing pain, not your whole operation, but one process, whether it's turns, work orders, lease renewals, move-ins, whatever is generating the most frustration or inconsistency right now for your organization, that's your target. Then watch how the work gets done. Sit down with someone on your team and ask them to show you how they actually do it. Not explain it, show you. Screen share, over the shoulder, whatever works. You'll be shocked at the gap between what they tell you, what you thought they did, and what they actually do. And that's your discovery day. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to be the 3-4 hour ones that we've been doing lately. You just watch. Then get 3 to 5 people who touch the process in a room. And ideally in a room and not on a Zoom or on a Google Meet, right? It's better when you're in the room. I know that's not always possible. A virtual meeting's better than nothing, but ideally in the same room. It needs to be cross-functional. And as I mentioned earlier, not just the people who own the process, but the people upstream and downstream who are affected by it, because they're going to have insights that the other team may not have. The handoffs are almost always where things break. So you need both sides of every handoff represented. And then, and this is really important, have someone who does not own the process facilitate. The people who do the work are too close to it. They'll skip steps they consider obvious. They'll defend decisions they've never questioned. You need someone whose job is to just ask why and what happens next and who owns that until you hit bedrock. If you don't have an OE team, that facilitator can be a peer from a different department, could be an office manager, can even be an outside consultant for a single session. The role is ask questions for specificity, document what you hear. Then it's very tempting at this stage to start building. It's really, really tempting to start building. However, what you need to do first is deconstruct the existing process. Do not skip to solutions. Spend the first meeting entirely on understanding what's happening today. And when you see something or hear something that's not the way it should be, resist the urge inside of you to try and solve it right then, because that's not what this first meeting's about. It will sidetrack you. It'll take you down a rabbit hole that will waste time. You just really want to deconstruct what's happening. And then once you get it deconstructed, now put it back together in a better way and build the documentation as you rebuild the process. Don't treat documentation as a follow-up task. If you redesign the process in a meeting and don't document it in the same session, trust me, it doesn't get documented in a timely way, or will get documented 3 months later by someone who wasn't in the room, and it'll likely be wrong. So do it in the moment. It's always the best time to get this sort of thing done. I guess this is what building in public actually looks like. Not a clean narrative arc where every decision was right. It's a real process where we tried something, realized it wasn't working, and had the, I don't even want to say humility because we messed it up. That's not necessarily being humble, but the recognition to say that, yeah, we screwed this up, to say so publicly and then change course. Because the reality is, no implementation's like spotless, right? Anyone who's out there who's done these before or is doing them currently in their own organization know that these things are hard. They're messy. You think something's going to work one way, it works a completely different way. And that's important to me to share that with the transformation that we're undertaking here at Northpoint. But the framework of what we're doing is ultimately the same from where I started. Process, training, technology, AI. The mechanism for doing the process work, that's what changed from the original episode 3 to this episode. And I think what we've landed on is fundamentally better. Not because it's more sophisticated or has more steps, it's because it puts the right people in the room and asks them the right questions. And so much about business is just about getting the right people in the room. We're a few weeks into this, and I'll be honest, I don't know if everything about this approach will work, but I know it's closer to right than what we were going to lead with and what we were doing before for the previous version of this episode. So as we learn more, guess what? You're going to hear about it. And I love that kind of accountability piece of just putting out there, this is what's working, this is what isn't, and trying to share this growth, both for me personally and for our organization, kind of out there with the world. So next episode, episode 4, is going to be a very cool episode. It's an interview with Kat Allday, who leads AI efforts for AppFolio. I tried really hard not to get that nerdy on a lot of AI deep dives. But it's a really great conversation that's already been recorded. That should be coming out in 2 weeks. And then after that, we're doing a live stream because I'm apparently a glutton for punishment. Where you can come ask questions. We're going to break down Nexus, which is our SOP architecture that's multi-layered. What is the actual structure? How does it work? We're going to pull it up live in our system and let people come live and poke holes in it or learn that too. So thank you for listening. Appreciate everyone, especially if you made it this far. Thank you for sticking with us through the pivot. And that's just the way it's going to be with year 1 is you get the real version. So appreciate everyone. Have a great rest of your day.